back to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, where we talk about everything, but not all at once. And this is my attempt to make a more radio-friendly version of the intro to the radio station. We thank all of you people for listening, and blah, 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 blah. Snake Bros! Snake Bros!
That's pretty good.
Okay. Well, I'm working on it. It'll get better.
Yeah.
Yeah, this podcast is where we say a whole lot about very little, because we know a great deal about nothing.
Yeah, so last time we did a little bit of intro into the background of the name of the podcast, and we did some background on Kyle. I didn't do mine at all, so we might get into that today. There's some other topics we might bring up, but who knows? Really, it's a free-flowing conversation, so we'll just go from there.
Yeah.
So first of all, let's start with news. Anything in the news that's weird that you want to talk about that's not politics?
Well, you just read some story about flat earthers, and that I ran into a flat earther. Well, I thought the guy had been trolled by flat earthers. I was like, dude, those guys are trolls. But he was like, no, man, they really believe it. And I was trying to tell him, I'll pay for your plane ticket to fly around the United States or fly around the world and prove it. Like,
who is that?
Fly around the United States.
Fly around the United States.
Because that's all there is out here, you know? Ain't nothing but sea, shining sea. We got big skies here in Texas. Yeah. Anyway, go on with you. You were reading, who was that? Some basketball player?
Yeah. Apparently Shaquille O'Neal.
No way.
Has joined the ranks of flat earthers. Yeah. Like, he's really tall, and he can't see any roundness of the earth when he's standing up. So,
well, you know, he could be trolling.
Yeah, he could be. But apparently there's a bunch of other celebrities, too. I was convinced, because I've dealt with the moon hoaxers, right? And we actually know two people that claim to not believe that we ever landed on the moon. We won't say their names, but yeah, we know these guys.
Yeah, one of them's Mike.
We won't say their names, but one of them's called Mike. But yeah, you know, we've hung out with him before, and I got into a conversation with him about it once, and I couldn't believe it at the time, because I had never really, at the time, which was a while back, I hadn't encountered anything like this. So I was just like, "Are you serious? Look at it, bro. It's right there." You know. But since then, of course, I've encountered plenty of them online.
Yeah, and you do a lot of that. I don't get online into the forums and do all the discussion or the comments and all that, but you do a lot of that.
Yeah.
Where you encounter all kinds of interesting people, and interesting opinions. And
yeah. And
I think that's cool. It's fueled a lot of great discussions on.
Yeah. I read, and like the steam level keeps rising. And I'm reading more, and I'm reading more, and finally, like, oh, I tell these people are dumb. But yeah, keyboard warrior. Satisfying sometimes. And sometimes really great conversations come out of that. But yeah, so I mean, Above Top Secret has a whole huge list of moon hoax. They start the threads on purpose and just dare anybody to come and disprove their moon hoax ideas. And I fell for it a couple of times, and eventually I realized these guys don't want to listen to what I'm saying.
The flag on the moon is not waving in the wind, Russ. It's obvious it's a fake.
You can't see any stars in the pictures they took from the moon.
Yeah.
Proof. Fake.
Explain that one. Why can't you see any stars? Is it because of the brightness of the...
Yeah, the surface of the moon is almost white, and the day/night cycle on the moon is 2 weeks long, because the moon only rotates around its own axis once a month, because its rotation period around its axis is the same as its orbital period around the Earth. That's why we always see the same side of it. So that makes its day a month long. Basically, the daytime period is 2 weeks, and then there's a nighttime period 2 weeks, right? So when the astronauts were ever on the moon, they always landed in the daytime, because otherwise it's pitch black. I mean, it's pitch black.
Well, then they could see one star in the sky.
The sun. That's not a real star.
But it wasn't in the picture.
That's right.
You're supposed to take pictures towards the sun.
So the surface of the moon is ash, mostly, and dust, and it's grayish and white, and it's bright. and so any camera, no matter how good, the distant stars in the black sky are they just don't show up because they don't put out enough light to overcome the brightness of the surface. So that's the reason for that. But you can't tell them that. They're like, no, we're told that the stars in the night sky in space are really, really bright.
How do we know that? Because we've been there and seen them? No.
Yeah.
Not according to your theory.
Yeah. Everyone knows that those aren't real stars. They're just holes poked in a black fabric.
But seriously, how can you even have that argument? How would they, if they believe that we have not been to the moon, how could they believe that they know what it looks like from the moon?
Right. I mean, and if you get, like, this is the thing I found out about arguing with them. If you get to a point to where they realize that there's no way they can sort of swivel around all the stuff you said, they just jump to the next thing that proves that we didn't go.
Yeah.
So they, and like I mean, you can start with the Van Allen belts. They believe that the Van Allen radiation belts around the Earth means that we couldn't leave the planet because the radiation in those belts is deadly. And I'm just like, the Earth is a ball, and supposedly these aren't flat earthers or whatever. They don't say that, but the Earth is a sphere.
How do you know that?
I don't know that. Maybe that's why they never believed my explanation of the belts.
Can't start with that.
But that's what I do. I'm like, so take a soccer ball, and then take a belt like you would use for holding up your pants. Wrap it around that soccer ball.
There's nowhere to get out.
And then see if can't leave the soccer ball. Belt strapped you on there.
Yep. There's nowhere to go.
There's no way to get off this ball with this belt.
So I can kind of understand. I mean, I can understand that people would not, some people would believe that we didn't actually do that. It was a hoax because the Cold War was involved and all that.
Yeah.
And whatever. It's just it's believable to me that people today in modern times with modern technology would believe that we hadn't been there.
Right.
It's still kind of absurd, but it's understandable. But flat earthers, like,
right. I will say with the moon hoaxers that, like, I don't have a problem as much with the idea that first landing was faked, but later we were doing it for real. It was just they were trying to up the schedule or whatever.
Right.
So, like, I don't actually think that happened, but conspiracy theories are what they are, and like, I'm fine with them saying, like, like, these first couple landings, I think they're bogus, but then we eventually did get there, because that's an entirely different concept than what they're actually saying. Because, like, what it sounds to me like, my conspiracy theory on the moon hoax thing is that the purpose of it is to make people believe that we can't go to space at all. That's really what is about the moon hoax.
So who would be pushing for that?
Right.
Well, there's quite a few forces out there that might be pushing for
exactly, especially when you start to see things like, and this, I don't want to get into politics too much, but you'll see things like if you're in an economic discussion with somebody, they have this phrase, or one of the things they'll say is like that endless growth on a limited planet is unsustainable. And that's a ridiculous thing to say when you're like, space? Because, the normal response is to be like, well, fortunately, we're not limited as a human race, and we can go out into space.
Yeah.
But, so if you have this sort of agenda of, like, world domination through economic oppression, whatever, again, politics, I don't want to get into that, but if you want to sort of suppress this and push the idea that, like, all control of everything needs to be given back to government so that they can control everything because we have limited resources and blah, 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 then, like, sort of, getting the idea out there that we actually can't go to space and it's all fake. So we can't expand off this planet. We're trapped here forever. And it's a limited resource thing, and so we can't use up our resources or whatever. And, like, that is, all that stuff is made to order.
It's also, that just makes me think that it's amazing that people can simultaneously believe that the government would, like, do that kind of a hoax, at that level, and to trick everyone or whatever, for whatever reason, to win a war, to do all this stuff, but then they think the government is capable of that level of deception.
Yeah.
And yet they want to turn over, like, everything.
Right.
Education, your education.
Yeah.
Your health.
The government tricked us about everything, but they won't trick us about this.
Yeah, dude. Wow. Anyway, we weren't supposed to go into politics. But damn it. Anyways. Pyramids.
So back to flat earthers though. Okay, so that was the moon hoaxers. That's my idea on them. But as I began to encounter, and this astounded me because I know about flat Earth because I study, just like Kyle. We study ancient beliefs, right? And so in esoterica, you have a sort of little fluffy story, right? About like fairy tales are a great example. Any fairy tale is a fluffy story that kids can remember, that kids can listen to and like and enjoy and sort of memorize the parts of it. But hidden, using metaphor and other symbols and stuff underneath that story is ancient wisdom. That's what esoterica is. So, flat Earth, the descriptions in ancient texts of the Earth having 4 corners or 4 pillars, with a tree in the middle. Like there's one I call Flat Earth 2.0, which is basically where the Earth isn't flat, but it's a dome. It's like a big hill, and there's a ring around the hill, and that's the oceans. You know, that's Flat Earth 2.0. It's not flat, it's a dome. Yeah. And there's a big tree at the top of the hill holding everything up, you know, holding up the sky. Those are processional illustrations.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like 4 corners, pillars.
Right. Yeah, those are all the pillars are, you know, the solstices and the equinoxes and like so.
Which procession is a circle.
Yeah, it's or a figure 8. You know, that's why the infinite symbol is the symbol of the cycle of infinity, of a figure 8 on its side, because the sun traces an 8 symbol laid over on its side in the sky. So the whole flat Earth conversation is a misunderstanding of ancient wisdom.
Yeah, but we encounter that everywhere with ancient wisdom, with all these ancient texts.
72 virgins, man.
Yeah.
Like it makes me sad to think of like the ancient wisdom concealed and ensconced in that text that has been turned into like so much death and destruction. With every major religion has done that. And you're just like, God, this was supposed to enlighten us about space.
That's why I love I'm going back to the parable thing. Like in the Bible, when Jesus tells the first parable, the disciples are like, why did you just talk to these people in parables?
What are you telling them?
And his answer to me is the answer to all of that, which is the knowledge was not for them, but it like the fairy tale is simple enough for them to remember, and within that story is contained the real knowledge that is only for a select few. And the masses will repeat that story forever, and thus make it available to one of the select few who comes along and hears it and will understand. I love that. Like
so and this is something I've been thinking about too. The focus on esoteric stories like that or whatever is always what is the hidden knowledge, you know, and then following from that, how did they get this knowledge and the ancient civilizations or whatever. But like I'm also interested in the other side of it. Who is it that figured out if I tell a story like this, it will be told forever?
Yeah, exactly.
That is also a form of hidden knowledge. And I'm just like, wait, if I just made up a fairy tale right now, I can almost guarantee you it isn't going to be, and I stood up on a mountain and told a bunch of people, like, do I think it'll be told 5,000 years from now? No. How are they making up these stories where they know that when you tell this story, it will go down through the ages? Like, that is also a hidden technology.
Yeah, that's true.
Some kind of weird understanding of the human mind.
And that seems to me that it would take a long period in human terms of studying the human race and understanding philosophy and all of these things to get that about humanity.
Archetypes they use archetypes, like, and it's like, so there was at some distant past an understanding of archetypes, and like if you put these types of symbols in stories, they will just plug into the human mind and be retold. That's fascinating.
I aspire to follow in those footsteps, like with my music and my lyric writing. I want to encode, you know, that same story of our even modern day knowledge, along with ancient knowledge that has been passed down, and kind of like the guy who wrote Star Wars or whatever is saying like, yeah, I don't even know this guy. Like,
You're not a real nerd. Get out of here.
Nerds are gonna get mad at me. Sorry, nerds. Anyway, Star Wars is great, but I'm just trying to save face over here.
You're digging a bigger hole.
Okay, I'll stop digging. Anyway, how he says, he says that he's just telling an old story in a new way.
Yeah.
And I kind of, I want to be able to do that too, with some of this ancient knowledge. And in a song, it's like, you're limited because it's a very short story, so I have to like compress all of this stuff down into very like archetypal.
Right, and it's interesting too. I have recently, that makes sense. And I've recently read and listened to some people who have said that like in music, in lyrics at least, the more utterly superficial the top level meaning is, the better it works for the deep esoteric stuff.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That reminds me. What was...
And so like that, I mean, does that not kind of like sort of rearrange 180 degrees all of ideas about pop music? Because, they're like, oh, baby, I miss you. And you're like, oh my God. But there's like...
Man, I'm going to have to go back and listen to all that again and see what they're really saying.
Yeah. What was the game with Jack Black? That was my favorite example of that, where they're the death metal band, but it was like pop death metal or whatever.
Yes.
The kids are on there. It's like, girlfriend.
Yeah. He gets all mad.
Yeah.
He just like shakes his head.
He's like, oh
God. Brutal Legend.
Brutal Legend. Yeah, that's a great game.
But
Dear
speaking of that idea you were talking about, the surface level meaning, reminds me of something you read to me a while back when we were coming back from the middle of nowhere off of a job about these, I don't know if they were sages or whoever they were, that they spoke or wrote about language there being 3 or 4 levels of language.
Yes.
And that common people speak and understand the first level, but while they're doing that, they're also speaking these other levels of meaning and understanding in the language, and they're not even aware of it. But the people who can understand that,
the sages,
they'll pick up information that people do not even know that they're saying.
Right.
From what the people are saying, and I guess you could look at that in many different ways. But the fact that they had broke it down into 4 levels, and they spoke of it that they are specific.
Yeah.
Very like.
That was a
my curiosity.
That was a Graham Hancock book. I wonder if that was that not in the end of Fingerprints of the Gods?
Could be. I listened to the audiobook, and I don't think that was.
Maybe it was in Underworld. No, it was probably in Supernatural.
I listen to audiobooks while at work doing a bunch of things, and that's why I have to listen to them multiple times, because there are I won't even realize that I'm not paying attention while I'm measuring stuff.
He finished Magicians of the Gods, and I'm like, all right, so did you hear that part about Gulumpadang and the guy there? And he's like, about what? I'm like the 3 chapters on that?
Yeah.
Listen to it again, man. Come on.
Yeah. No, I was busy messing up the vineyard and redoing it.
Yeah, this is not something I was planning on talking about, but it just came up. Like what time we got here? What are we at?
We're at 1833.
Okay.
It's an esoteric number.
The ancients were, I mean, like, at least for what we can see now, the little we can glean, there's agriculture, architecture, and astronomy are the main 3 things that we see, and that may just be a product of what's left. It's difficult to tell. The beginnings of agriculture, more and more I'm believing now that like what our archaeologists are finding is not the beginning. It doesn't make any sense as a beginning. The Jericho, I'm sure most everybody is familiar with the city of Jericho, at least the name of it. But that city has been found to be one of the most ancient, consistently occupied places on Earth. It's still occupied today, and they've dug down layers and layers and layers and layers of cities on top of each other, and the deepest ones are 9,000 BC, so we're talking about 11,000 years old. People were already living in Jericho.
Wow.
And those oldest cities are very strange looking. Like obviously we can only see what you would call the floor plan, right? Because all that's left is like the foundations of stuff. It's just, it's been flattened. But like there are huge buildings that have multiple rooms that are all the same size, like cells. Like there'll be a long rectangle, and there's 3 rows of square rooms in there, like multiple sections of them all the way down, and there's no doorways. Like what is that building for? It looks like a giant battery. Like it's like a huge box with a sets of 3 cells going all the way down, and it's like there's no entrance to any of these quote unquote rooms.
Goodbye.
It's anyway, the lowest levels of that, you have these strange buildings, but also the midden areas, the place where people threw their trash and stuff, show that the people who showed up and that settled the first Jericho did not have they were eating native plants and animals. So they were hunting wild animals. Basically, they were doing hunter-gatherer stuff. But they're building a city, okay? And it's not a village. This was a city, right? I mean, or I guess maybe you might call it a town. But it had stone foundations, and these people weren't throwing up teepees and thatch. They were building serious structures. And they just showed up out of nowhere. And we're talking about, again, 11,000 BC. Okay? Mm-hmm. So 11,000 BC, these people just appear out of nowhere. No one knows where they came from. They appear out of nowhere. They throw up all these stone structures with weird giant batteries and stuff or whatever. But they're eating. The equivalent now would be like we're building a city out in the middle of America somewhere, and if somebody was looking through our trash, they would see that we were eating deer, bison, and whatever local plants we could forage out of the forest, right? In other words, we weren't growing any crops, and we didn't have any domesticated cattle. These people just showed up and they're eating whatever's around in the area while they're building this city. So up to a decade or so later, in the Midden Piles, there began to appear the remains of what were obviously domesticated versions of the local animals and domestic crops of the local plant life. And there were some that were not domestic too, but the point is that we can't do that. We don't know really. We're not really
10 years or whatever.
Well, I mean, yeah, but really, do you know of any animal that has been domesticated? People will have they got tigers for pets, but those tigers are still tigers, right? Even many generations down the line, they're still tigers. And yet,
so wait. Then, so you're suggesting, or
I don't know what I'm suggesting. I'm just trying to say,
are you saying that what we know of as, say, like domesticated cattle and domesticated dogs and domesticated cats are a different sort of species almost because of their domestication?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you're gonna have to explain that to me.
Right. So,
something having to do with Inki, the Anunnaki.
Yeah, I'll get into that because that is part of this I didn't think of. But yeah, you're right. So a domestic crop plant is so drastically different from anything wild that a lot of them we're not even really sure what the original version was.
So they talk about corn being
has no wild version.
But I've heard things like, in school, it didn't used to have all these big fat seeds all like this on it.
That's a presumption.
Smaller and flatter, but they're presuming that they don't have any fossil evidence or anything.
There's no extant or extinct versions of it that's been found.
Alive, are we?
Bananas?
What?
Bananas?
Don't get me into the banana conspiracy.
Okay.
We'll have to do a whole podcast on bananas! God damn it!
Fruit of the snake. Where do they come from?
Yeah, fruit of the snake. It's human pills. Bananas are human pills. We'll get into that later.
Man pills.
That's right. Gotta have man pills if you're gonna be hurling humans.
Yeah.
Okay. So briefly for now, maybe we can get into this later on in the podcast. A domestic cat, animal or plant is so different from any wild version that sometimes it's very difficult to even tell. To the point where we don't know what the wild version, they know that the wild version of the what we now call cows was the aurochs.
Okay. I gotcha.
But think of the aurochs and of cattle. They don't even.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even. Yeah. The difference is night and day. Like an aurochs is huge and terrifying. I mean, a bull nowadays is kind of scary. I mean, it's pretty scary, especially if they're running at you. But an aurochs, you know, an aurochs will run through a semi truck and not notice. They're huge. I mean, they're just just massive. Maybe the back of a semi truck, you know. But so these people showed up out of nowhere and just bam, like it's really in almost no time at all. They just suddenly whap. They have domestic versions of the local plant and animal life.
So, like in Monty Python, when the guy starts reading, "Let there be wheat and barley and flaxseed and all this,"
he's calling out domestic crops.
Right, and that kind of stuff is in all types of ancient texts.
Yeah,
like where they just they list off all of this.
Right, and they're calling it the bounty of God or whatever, and
it's the cornucopia.
Yeah, like the point is that like if you think of trying to live on this earth without all that stuff. Like, you know, you're basically trying to eat wild. Okay,
you're running around a butt flap.
Yeah, the easiest version to look at, and this is, I mean, there's no visualization, and most people have never seen pictures of this. I haven't seen pictures of it, but the one of the crops that they know the original versions of is grain. Okay, so those are grass, basically. They call them wild grasses, right? So we have these. If you look at our version, like anybody who's seen like Gladiator, right? That this one of the signature scenes in Gladiator is he's dreaming of being home, and you just see his hand dragging through these huge, fat, you know, heads of grain. Okay, and they're beautiful. They're all orange and bright, and they're, you know, 3 or 4 feet tall, and the heads of grain on the top are just massive. Well, if you look at the native grasses versions of those that they think that these came from, the grasses might grow to 2 or 3 feet tall. But the grain heads are little tiny, little bitty things that have seeds in them. They're not, you know, they don't look like, man, I can cook that up and make a bowl of rice. You know, they're just drastically different. So yes, so in this same area, the Jericho area, are where the native grasses are that we all now all over the world use as grains. So. Whoever was doing this Jericho project, the original city there that I was talking about, they were building. It is their domestication of native grasses, plus the people at Göbekli Tepe a little earlier, and they may have been the same people, we don't know, are responsible for all the grains we have. Okay, so what I was originally, detangentizing this conversation once. Detangentizing, yeah, this podcast should be called Tangent Bros. Building and planting are all over ancient stuff. Like that's just that, you know. And so Kyle and I have been in construction our entire lives, and in some capacity, not as much, because I don't have as much experience in this as I would like to, and Kyle has some of it too. But in moving very heavy loads, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, so this is why when we're looking at things like Baalbek, or the pyramids, or just looking at, like, you know, these people are moving.
Or looking at Sacsayhuaman.
That's right, Sacsayhuaman. I like looking at Sacsayhuaman. That name is so strange.
Yeah.
And you know, it's shaped like a puma. If you zoom out, like the walls, the jagged walls are like the mane of the cat. Anyway,
you're detangentizing right now, man.
Yeah. So detangentizing. We have done a lot of building. We're just now. This is fascinating to me because we're getting into a period of our lives where we would like to go to some of these places and look at them and do some serious study. That keeps getting stalled, and then suddenly we got this farming job.
That's right.
And we're like, oh, that's why.
Yeah, and the two main things that we're growing are olives,
yeah,
and grapes.
Yeah.
And those two things are like as far back in antiquity as you can go, like the idolized things to be grown.
And like the other cool thing I've always thought of is like the olive branch is considered to be like that was the gift to the god Apollo when you went to get the oracle. You brought an olive branch, yeah.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, so once we get these olive trees going, if we can do it right, we'll be able to bring olive branches and be like, okay, tell me something.
And we're gonna be making wine too.
Yep, so make the wine. So we'll
Vitis.
Mm-hmm. So it's like we have to delve into this aspect. Like, you know, there's the two different main occupations.
Someone is preparing us for something.
That's right.
We were doing construction, moving big stones.
That's right.
And then now we're learning how to plant crops.
Right,
So.
and also The other main thing that ancient people did was mining, and the guy who we're building the orchard for is in mining. So it's like, well, this makes sense.
That's cool. Well, we're gonna start breaking up our podcast into different episodes, roughly 30 minutes long, and we've reached that point in this one. So
I'm gonna take a break.
we're gonna take a little break.
We'll be back with
You're
you
gonna hear
guys.
some kick-ass bumper music like this.
Bumping.
No, it's gonna be more kick-ass than that. We're working on it, but we'll be back in a little bit. Thanks for listening. Snake Bros. Okay, welcome back to Brothers of the Serpent, and this is part 2 of the second episode.
Well, it's
part 2.2.
second half, first hour.
Actually, this is the first episode because the pilot is not technically considered episode 1.
The pilot is episode 000.
The pilot is where we made all of the mistakes that we're hopefully never going to make again, such as phenomenons, which are multiple copies of a John Travolta movie.
That's right.
Anyways.
Phenomenons. Yeah, in the future we plan to have a We're Dumb section where basically, we review things that we got totally wrong in the previous podcasts. So we'll be like, so phenomenons, we're dumb. It's not, it's phenomena.
And then we also discussed possibly having actually making Russ's dream come true, having a contest to see, if any listeners have great ideas about how to become an out-of-place artifact.
Yes, that is.
Because it's just fun.
Yeah.
And
I actually don't. I have thought of many different ideas, which I'll go through some at some point. But man, I just can't come up with one. But it's like really where you're like, yes,
that's it.
that's
Really,
I guess the hardest thing is like, will they find you? But
yeah,
that you kind of
can't
leave
worry
a chance.
about
Yeah, just like if they find me,
Can't worry about
is
that.
what it has to be.
You might be blended up in a tidal wave. You never know if you're going to be a fossil. So just
blended.
anyway, at the end of the last segment, we were talking about these main 3 things in ancient times.
Yeah, that we can see. Yeah.
That we can see that it seems like the ancients are very concerned about, or that these things are revered by them, and that is agriculture, architecture, and astronomy.
The triple A's.
Yeah. So Russ had brought up Jericho because of this strange thing about where they were digging up and finding suddenly that they had domesticated animals and
Crops. Yeah.
crops. And all that.
just pretty much.
But in many other cultures where they found evidence of farming and crops, there's been that same problem that, man, these domesticated crops just, bam, they were there.
Yeah.
And a lot of the ancient texts tell us that they were given to humanity by the gods. So
Right, and as of right now, the earliest evidence of domestic crops shows up at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and it is
Right.
the native grasses in that area that still are in that area. There are still wild weeds, grasses around there.
and architecture at Göbekli Tepe. They
Right.
supposedly invented both megalithic architecture and farming.
Yeah, and agriculture,
And agriculture.
the concept of not being a hunter-gatherer.
Right.
Because and that's
hard to accept.
Right. I mean,
especially to me, look, I want to give those people who took the time to write down what they knew and preserve it, or do their best to preserve it. I want to respect them by actually taking their word for it.
right, and
I want to believe that what they're telling me is the truth as best they knew it. And they're
Right.
saying, well, these other things came and gave it to us.
Right. Well, at Göbekli Tepe specifically, there is no writing from
Right.
that we know of.
I'm
And-
speaking more of the
Right.
the Sumerians.
But their words are clear in their architecture that those guys knew what they were doing. They weren't making this up as they went. And before, his name is Klaus Schmidt.
I don't know.
Before the German archaeologist there had a sudden, crazy, insane heart attack and died. He was digging. He had moved over to the other side of the hill, and now Göbekli Tepe is a hill. The hill is called Göbekli Tepe. which means Mountain of Enlightenment. But basically no, that's not right. That's Gunung Padang. But yeah, Göbekli Tepe is a hill that was built over time as the people that were making these circles covered them up. Okay, he dug up 3 or 4 enclosures on one side of the hill, and then they had GPR scans done of the entire area and found out that there were, as many as 50, 60, maybe even up to 100 enclosures buried under that hill. And so what they did just before he died is they had moved over to the other side of the hill to the area they thought was the oldest, because he was looking for the beginning, hoping to find out that they didn't know what they were doing when they started. And instead they're digging up one of the oldest enclosures, and they found that, you got it?
It means Potbelly Hill.
Oh, right.
Okay, that's in Turkish.
Yes, in Turkish.
I think there's another.
So it is, yeah, that's what I thought. It's the same with Gunung Padang. Like, to them it means, in the local language or whatever, it means Mountain of Enlightenment, but
Now that was in Magicians. I don't remember what the other meaning was.
Yeah. So anyway, they started digging on one of the oldest enclosures, and what they found, of course, was that
Klaus Schmidt also was.
Klaus Schmidt, I got it right. What they found was that the pillars were larger and better made, and the high relief on them were far better quality. And like the difference with carvings, you have high relief and low relief. Low relief is where you carve out the wall, so you got this flat plane, and then you dig into the rock to carve out your pictures, right? So the carving is imprinted in the wall. A high relief is where you dig out the wall and leave the carving parts, the figures, sticking out of the. That's way harder to do. So where basically you run your hand across it and the figures are protruding. That's high relief, and it's much more difficult to do high relief than it is to do low relief. And so all the pillars that go back to Tepe are high relief. Well, not all of them. I guess there are some that are low relief, but those look like older or newer carvings, and that's the thing. So you have these amazing T-pillars with all this intricate stuff protruding out from them, but all very stylized and beautiful. I mean, they had think of that. They had an advanced art form.
Right.
And we're talking about
with the architecture. I mean,
the modern archaeology.
To try to build any structure that's round. Let's say that they were roofed. We don't really know if they were, but just standing up columns. Like, we've poured concrete columns that were, I think they were 12-inch diameter. We used sonotube, which is basically like a hardened cardboard tube with a wax interior, so that it doesn't stick to the concrete. And you can typically get them in like 8-foot sections or 10-foot sections or whatever. And we got the longest sections we could, but the columns needed to be like 4 foot higher or something. So we had to add a cut off piece of another one to that, and we had to brace them. They were freestanding on top of a poured and leveled slab of concrete. So, and the slab had anchor bolts coming up from the bottom. So this is like
an anchor bolt,
the easiest way we could possibly do this, right? And we run rebar up the center to metal rods to reinforce the concrete, and then we had to build these collars that went around the sonotube out of wood, and then
frames against that to hold them up.
Yeah, to stand them up. So 4 legs coming down to make sure they were plumb, and then we got a concrete pump truck, and we'd sling that thing way up there, and then fill it up and vibrate it to get the concrete to settle. And it was just, that is a very difficult thing to do. These guys cut the stones out of the hill and then moved them over to where they were, and they stood them up. They cut pockets in the bedrock, limestone bedrock, for them to sit in.
Yeah, little sockets.
And then they stood them up and set them down in there. And I don't know if they did the high relief carvings before or after this, but to try to move a piece of stone that big and then stand it up and have it be plumb this socket that you carved out with plumb, what tool?
Plumb meaning it's standing up perfectly straight.
Right, it's level, it's not going to fall over, it's not leaning.
Right.
And then
just the idea of cutting a socket out of the bedrock and having the bottom of that be
flat enough.
That is not easy.
So just imagining that we poured these columns and and then we had to then move them somewhere and then stand them up on. I mean, I can't even.
And
imagine.
again, ours had anchor bolts, but like you said, an anchor bolt is basically where you pour the concrete slab and you leave pieces of metal coming up out of the concrete, so that when it dries, you've got these pieces of metal sticking out of the concrete that you then pour your column onto, so that it's attached, anchored to the slab. They didn't have that. There's no anchor bolts. And
those things are still standing.
Now they did bury them, but it's just.
But still, okay. You hold this while I bury it.
Right.
Right.
Oh man. So
they didn't have a backhoe.
So this is why we were bringing up the fact that we've done a lot of building, because in a lot of the if you've watched Ancient Aliens or whatever, anything like that, when you're looking at these ancient structures, things people will bring up, and if you don't know about precision, some people will seem to be flipping out about what doesn't seem like a big deal to you. That like, the pyramid is like is oriented to the cardinal directions down to like 1/60th of 1 degree, and like that's a big deal. And people are like, well, okay, so like we're used to very precise things in the modern age. But I'm telling you, when we build stuff, even in the modern age, like I'll just say this: a modern home construction builder is fine with an accuracy of an inch. Okay, the pyramids were done with accuracies of 0.0000001 inch in some cases, and that is a structure that's huge. Like, like
the king, I think it's the King's Chamber is, if I got this right, I could be wrong. One of the chambers that's all granite on the interior it's like so level, level on the floor, and the walls are so vertical, like like the degree you're talking about of precision, and that thing is 300 feet up in the air off the base.
Right, and it's perfectly centered.
That's not up in the air. It's 300 feet up into that pyramid structure.
Right. So because we've done building, and if you're over there, you're cutting boards for the construction guy, and like you're off a quarter of an inch, they're like, it's not a big deal. A quarter of an inch.
Yeah.
If you got off a quarter of an inch when you're on one block when you're building a pyramid, you end up with a fucked up corkscrew. You don't have a pyramid. You can't do it. I mean,
so going back to lining it up to the cardinal directions and how ridiculously accurate they got that. None of our modern buildings are that accurate.
Right.
Okay. We've done in modern times or more modern times alignments to the cardinal directions, and they're not even close.
Right.
But
the Capitol buildings in D.C.
I tried to do this with a water tank that was basically going to be like a small pool set in the ground, and I got these big natural stones that were pointed, and they were too big for me to lift, but some of them I could slide on the ground or
so
pick up one end and flip it over.
You're gonna make a compass rose, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I made the compass rose around this round water trough. And
tried to point them to due north.
Yeah, and so I used a compass, and I tried to line it up.
And so if you're using a compass, those aren't cardinal. That's magnetic.
That's true. Magnetic.
So these people with the pyramid, it's cardinal. They knew the difference between the magnetic north, which is not the same as, and depending on where you are on the planet, it shifts. So if you're not in Egypt, if you're over in the United States, the angle that magnetic north is off from cardinal north is not the same.
My point was simply that I had this direction. I was going to make these rocks, point this one this way, the other one 180 degrees from that, the other one 90 degrees from that, and so on and so forth. And I had the thing sitting there telling me which directions they were, and it was so hard. I could nudge this one this way, and then it didn't look even all the way around. I move this one. Okay, this one needs to slide up around. It was just
right. And those are the ones that you could slide a little bit.
Yeah, we're talking about stones
or whole buildings. You can't slide a building around. So the precision levels are a big deal, and sort of this is the thing. Modern archaeologists, they don't know anything about construction either. They've never built anything.
Well, they built a big roof over Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, they hired a contractor, and I bet you he is.
Which is another problem, because now you can't study any of the possible astronomical alignments, because they don't even believe that they have that knowledge yet. Well, why do you assume that when supposedly they just created agriculture and megalithic architecture, and you just assume that they didn't know anything about astronomy at that point? Why?
Yeah.
Why would you assume that?
Right. Well, that's because you can sort of fluff past them generating the domestic crops and animals because we don't know how to do it, right? We do know how difficult astronomy can be, so it's hard for them to say, well, they just a bunch of dudes in butt flaps came up with this overnight. You can't do that with astronomy because we understand how difficult it is. But with domestic stuff,
it's frustrating to me that any scientist in any field would just automatically disregard something like that because of some paradigm without looking. I mean, this dude was uncovering something that was blowing away the entire
the whole paradigm.
The whole paradigm.
Yeah, human development.
You know, and like to just throw that out. Oh no, they didn't know that back then. Well, how do you know? You didn't know they had what you're digging up right now.
You've been wrong this whole time, and now you expect me to think you're right. Well, and I mean, but look what they did. Look at the National Geographic on Göbekli Tepe. Like, just look at the cover. The cover shows their artist's idea of what it was like for the people building it, and you see like the T-pillars, just like they are now, but they put in these crappy, you know, like these crappy walls made of like local rocks that are not. There's no masonry done to them all. They just kind of stacked. So they show these rocks stacked up around the pillars to make a circular structure, and then people in butt flaps walking around it. And you're just like, oh my god. Yeah. Well, maybe it's because they there, Russ. People wear butt flaps and it's hot. Building stuff in bikinis, but it's because, and when in Graham Hancock's book, when he's talking to Klaus Schmidt, he asked him directly. He's like, so this sort of blows away the whole concept of human urban development and the idea that of when we started to do these things. And he said no, that he believed that this was that it accentuated the current paradigm, that it made it more understandable. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
This is Göbekli Tepe. At the time that the pyramids in Cairo, the Great Pyramid and everything, at the time those pyramids were being built, Göbekli Tepe was older to those people. Yeah, at the time supposedly they were built. Yeah, you have to put that caveat in there. So at the time that they believed that the pyramids were built in Cairo, Göbekli Tepe was already older to those people than the pyramids are to us now.
Right. That's
okay. That is how much farther back there this is. It is like there. You go to Sumer, which is maybe you could say maybe 1,000 years previous to like the oldest kingdom of Egypt. Previous to Sumer, you got to go back 6,000 years before you get to Göbekli Tepe. That is as long as recorded history.
Right. Hey, nothing profound could have happened during that period.
No, of course not. Right? Like they built Göbekli Tepe, and then they were like, "Man, that sucked. Let's go back to being dudes in butt flaps."
Okay, so to try to continue on this thing about the 3 A's, the triple A.
Well, you had something about Jericho. I want to hear about that.
Oh yeah, it just occurred to me when he was talking about Jericho a while ago that I remember the biblical story of Joshua's war with Jericho or whatever, and I looked it up in the break, and Joshua took his army and the Ark of the Covenant, okay, which is some. I mean,
it's
we
new
could
part.
go into that.
Come on, it's the new part. That is an acronym.
The Ark of the Covenant. They take that and they are told by God to march around the city one time each day for 7 days, and on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, and then
make a shitload of noise.
Make a bunch of noise. They had all these priests with ram's horns. They were all supposed to blow their horns at the end, and all the people in the army shouted, and the walls came down. And it occurred to me that this is another parable. This is the numbers in that story sound to me like something processional, or possibly telling us a different story. There's a hidden knowledge in that story, and just one that I came up with off the top of my head is the idea of an age, because you brought up the fact that the ram's horn is the
signifying Aries, which is the age that it was in. Yes,
right.
So that gives you the plug-in. Like, okay, this is processional. They're blowing ram's horns. That's Aries.
Right, and Jericho, as you described, is this place of ancient civilization.
Yeah.
Okay, that sprung up. So it's almost like telling us a story about the end of an age and the end of an epoch, destroying an advanced civilization. And it's couched in this symbol of a war. But again, they were commanded to carry this artifact that was had divine properties of destruction, right? The Ark of the Covenant around this building 7 times, and thinking of just procession in general, like with comets and all that. These things are circling around us, and sometimes they hit, and the horn blast and the yelling is like the cataclysm that comes that tears down the civilization.
That's really okay. So I've never.
And they all run in and they loot everything and all this stuff, and then of course there's the additional aspect of the story. There was a spy within,
and one person, they survived. That part of the wall doesn't come down.
That's right.
Okay, so this is
the
fascinating.
spy was given special knowledge.
That's
Go to this part of the building.
That's right.
And you will not be
Take your
destroyed.
family there.
We're looking at the story of Noah. It's the same type of deal.
That's cool. Okay, so as you were saying that, I just remembered, and this also was probably in Graham Hancock's book where I was reading about the initial Jericho in the first place, but he talked about the walls of those oldest cities, and he said they are. He spent a lot of time talking about how, there's not a lot of in these ancient cities, you don't see stuff that makes you think of war. You don't see ramparts. You don't see weapons. You don't see things where you think that they were like putting a wall around their city to guard from armies and stuff. But Jericho, he mentioned this especially. He was like, these were walls that were they were 30 meters thick.
Right.
And they went all the way around it in a perfect square. He was like, these weren't walls to hold out an army. These were walls to hold out a flood.
Right. Yes.
Or something, some cataclysm. Basically the city could be, you could have an ocean around it, and it would be a hole in the water because the walls would hold out the water, right? Yeah. So, in your idea that this war at Jericho with Jacob is a symbol of procession.
Joshua,
I'm sorry, Joshua. It's the same guy.
Same guy.
Pharaoh. Yeah, whatever. Biblical name, whatever. Jay. Those walls are to protect from cataclysm.
Right. So something happens 7 times.
Mm-hmm. And the walls come down. So you have in an ancient city that has walls that specifically protect from cataclysm, and then you have the story, here's a processional symbol, and those walls came down anyway, and the ancient civilization was destroyed.
Yes.
Man.
So that's one way of looking at it. We like to look at, we love like taking these ideas, like once you get this idea of procession and you start seeing the numbers, anytime there's a number in an ancient text, as we talked in the pilot episode, that's like a trigger. We start looking, okay, well, what else is in here? What other information?
Right.
Russ brought up the ram's horns. There's so much of that in these ancient texts. So it's really cool to think about these stories that were told. To me, I keep it in mind all the time about the parable, and looking at the stories themselves, like even the story of Jesus is a parable.
Yeah.
That contain hidden knowledge about past civilizations, which I believe is what all of this stuff is.
Right. We told you in the pilot episode that we have all these various little terms and phrases and stuff that mean that we've given definitions specifically, because so much of the stuff we talk about, it requires hundreds of words to describe some concept, and we're like, man, that we need some easy way to say that because we're going to be saying it all the time. So we come up with our own. So one of them is these eyes, right? And this concept is awesome. So once you start to learn this stuff, you start to learn, wow, these numbers, if I see a specific number, like a really strangely specific number in some ancient text, that is a flag. Or if I see a reference to anything that connects to any of the zodiac symbols, that's another flag, right? So then what we would say is, I need to go back and look at that with these eyes.
Right.
These eyes now understand that, and you read it and you just get so much more than you did before.
Exactly. So I remember this story of the walls of Jericho from my childhood when I was going to Bible school.
Right.
And Russ bringing up Jericho made me like, yeah, I need to go look up this battle that happened that brought down the walls with these eyes.
That's right. And you read it, you're like, holy crap!
Yeah.
There's, I knew before I was going to look at it, there was more of it. Damn.
And
So
that
awesome.
just makes me think of so many other things too. So many of the stories that I learned, and which I've since found out are also stories contained in many other than non-biblical texts.
Yeah.
Other ancient texts like the story of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of tongues. It was really one of the first big stories of the Bible that
we spent a lot of time on Babel, and that one's still. Oh man, we can do multiple.
Because to me, like language, going back to what we talked about in the first part, these levels of language, we began to talk about language for many reasons, but Russ had brought up some strange things about language where a lot of things that we do seem to homogenize.
Yeah.
We as humans do. The knowledge spreads around and everybody kind of gets to do it. Like take smartphones for example, or the automobile.
Right.
Like everybody kind of gets it, and then you can go to Europe and they're driving on the other side of the road, but whatever, no big deal.
Once somebody gets a good idea, and that's like a really good way to do it, that gets passed around. We share these
Right.
like a simple thing is a drill.
Whereas language, it almost goes in the opposite direction. When you could take a group of people that all speak the same language, and then you separate them by just, say, in the United States, you put one person up there in the Northeast and the other person down here in Texas, and after a couple generations, they can't understand each other. Mm-hmm. We're like, hey, y'all, what are y'all doing up here in New York?
Well, horrible acts.
Yeah.
Why in the world don't you join at a talk like a normal human being?
I don't know what the hell you just said.
Whatever you said.
So it's weird how it sort of gets separated, and I mean, even looking at the English-speaking people that came here from Great Britain, our accents are just vastly different after a couple of hundred years.
Yeah, and I since then anyway, we'll keep going with this. Yeah, so language tends to diversify, down to dialects or whatever. But like there's thousands, who knows how many languages we had, and plus the written ones. They're all different. Whereas, like he was saying initially, most of the stuff we tend to do, they converge. They homogenize. We get to where we're sharing this, and like if I see like I was saying earlier, a drill that was made in Japan, it's a drill. I recognize, that's going to drill into something.
If you're a carpenter, like all of these
all the tools
things, and all the tools are the same, and the way you do things is very similar.
Math is the same way. Math, being a universal language, or geometry, those don't change across culture. And yet, when we talk, all you have to do is like live apart for a while, apparently. And so, and I've since thought about that, and I think that the example you brought up, where you got people in New York and then people come down to the South, and like within a few generations, and not just that, they're leaving Britain and coming to the United States, and suddenly they're talking like Yankees within a couple of generations. Like they lose their British accent, or they come up with the American one. What's happening there? To me, the fact that happens very quickly and then stops happening. Right? Like people in Texas are not getting deeper Southern accents. Like there are deep Southern accents, but it's not getting deeper. Just like up in New York City.
So you're saying somebody moves to Texas and they slowly get the Texas accent and then they're done?
It seems to be an environmental thing to me. Like maybe it's has
some people I've noticed, it never changes. Like, oh, you're like, where are you from? They're like, oh, I've been living here for like 30 years, and you're like, wow,
yeah, right. So maybe it happens in the formative years of childhood. Or whatever. But what I'm trying to say is, like, I'm not talking about specific people, but more along the generations. Because you get people in the northeast of the United States, they lose their British accent. Some of them come down to the South and start talking differently. But that change eventually stops. Like, there's a separation that happens there. But after a while, it stops separating. The New York accent is not getting thicker. The Texas accent's not getting thicker. They've gone a certain distance apart and they've stopped there. And now it's been many, 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 many generations. Like you would think that they were already talking like that after a couple of generations, that we would be so far apart now that we can't understand each other at all. But
there's another thing that's happening too, where communication across vast distances is getting better and better.
Right, and we're beginning to. I mean, like English is now the language of the internet. Like I talk to people all the time, and I find out like this is not your native language. I'm like, wow, you speak it better than most of my friends. Yeah. And me, and my brother. But the point is that there is something strange about language in general. It's just harkening back to that story of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of tongues. I think you also think that there is some, in that story is preserved some knowledge about language, or what I call it, the magic of language. I think it's very strange. There's something going on there, and there's something to study, because within it, like in the first part of this podcast, you talked about how the ancient people figured out, or how could they figure out that you can couch these ideas in these parables, and that those archetypes will be remembered and repeated. So there's something, it's almost like hypnosis, right? You can hypnotize somebody by talking to them, and
relaxed. Oh yeah, and by the way, watch my watch.
Yeah.
But
Very relaxed.
yeah, there's just a lot of, and then there's the legends of magic and casting spells, and that was language, which is another thing. Yeah, spell.
Yeah.
Which we've talked about a lot.
And the concept that you can speak a few words and shit happens. Like, it's like you could send a fireball down somebody's throat or whatever. It's like and it's called a spell.
Right.
And then of course every sorcerer had his book.
Right. That he wrote his spells in.
Right.
What was he doing? He was spelling.
Yeah. Casting is an interesting term too.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, to me, like, casting the spell is to speak it. Mm-hmm. So we talked about how these spells could be real. Like this idea of creating and casting a spell, and then that spell causes all of this stuff to happen. We witness this every day.
Yeah.
Like Martin Luther King wrote a speech. He was creating his spell. And then he
spoke it out. Yeah, did he write that? I don't know.
I'm just saying, if he writes a speach, and then he gets up on the podium and he speaks it to a crowd of people, and it
changes
causes all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And we're still being, like, things are still happening because of speeches given by great magicians, perhaps.
The Bible, massive spell.
Right. These people that wrote, the text that we consider ancient texts or biblical texts, they could be considered to have written spells which have changed the course of humanity.
And this is
still having
right.
a
This
great
is
effect
interesting.
on it.
This is interesting because if you think of it in terms of that, why did a lot of ancient cultures had the resources and the time or whatever and the wealth to teach everybody how to read and write? They didn't. It was a sort of a privileged thing, and you had scribes, and that was their job, was to read and write, and that was it. And maybe it's because they understood that it was a dangerous, powerful thing. Like, think of all the people arguing on the internet now, all of them casting spells on each other,
right?
And we just, it's a giant, massive magic battle.
Yeah, so thousands of years in the future, they'll be like, back then, there were tweeters, and they cast tweets, and it caused all kinds of mayhem.
Specialized in magic that was done in very short bursts.
Yeah. How did they cast these tweets? Well, they used bricks. They rooted them in the dark. Yeah, they rooted their phones and made bricks.
All right, so that is the end of the second half of the first hour, and we're going to take another break, and we'll be back with you guys shortly. Hello, welcome to hour 2 of Brothers of the Serpent podcast. We are, I am Russ, this is my brother Kyle.
What's up?
And we are in the midst of talking about the 3 A's, which we see ancient civilizations being mostly concerned with. And we've gone through some stuff about the agriculture, but I wanted to get back to this concept of domesticating things. That word is sort of used loosely today. I mean, people are like, yeah, so they domesticated these crops, but what does that really mean? I did say in the first hour that the domestic versions of some of these plants and animals are so different from the wild versions that we don't even know what the wild versions are. Like, that's how different. Like, so if there's a wild version of corn, it's not really clear what it is.
Right.
It may have gone extinct.
Right, it's amazing to me that there's not fossil records of these.
Yeah, that's right. That's another thing you brought up about the fossils, and like we should talk about that because,
like, are there fossils that they're like, this is the original corn? What was corn like?
No.
However long ago.
No.
Or do they think that like?
I mean, there could be, but nobody's found it. Okay. But yeah, so briefly with the fossils. This is one of the problems I have with a lot of them. Okay, the terms used here are misleading. The fossil record And if you look at any textbook, and there's sort of this implication that we have fossils that sort of give us this record of what has lived on this planet. So let's talk about what is required to make a fossil. A fossil is some organic thing that has been completely mineralized. All right, all of its organic stuff, its carbon-based things have been replaced with mineral versions, and they'll replace it down to the atomic level to where the structure of the original organic thing is clearly it's apparent, but it's made out of rock now. It's not made out of of organic matter. That can only happen in very specific circumstances. So you have to basically what? Go ahead.
How do we know? Like how many circumstances it can happen?
Because of the way we find them, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it has to be specific circumstances.
Okay, so yeah,
I guess what I'm suggesting is maybe we don't know all of those.
I'm sure we don't. Yeah, but still, okay, I'll just say this: when something dies, it falls down on the ground and rots, right? Or if it's in the ocean, it gets eaten, taken apart. The same thing happens here. A deer dies, or a dude dies in the woods.
On their bones scattered.
Right, like they fall. I mean, you can go online and you can look at time lapse versions of like some corpse. Like I remember watching one of a lizard, huge lizard, and it was dead. And they just did this time lapse thing, and went by, days went by, and ants just dismantled it. I mean, the skin is gone, and then all the soft tissue just disappears, and then the bones start getting carried off, and
Yeah.
And,
so what were the circumstances?
So
that created all of these
vast
fossils?
number of things that die here rot on the surface or in the water or whatever, right? So and the reason that happens is because of bacteria and ants and other scavenging things. But basically, like, you rot.
Right.
But we find fossils of like invertebrates, like squid, that have no bones except for their beak, and we can see down to the cellular level how they were built. How does that happen? They didn't rot at all. They didn't rot at all. Okay, so for that to happen, the easiest explanation. So imagine a dog. This poor dog's about to die. Okay, he's about to become a fossil. He needs to be picked up out of his environment, which is full of organic stuff. Okay, so he's in a forest. He needs to be lifted out of the forest. The forest needs to be completely swept away. Okay, so that all the way down to the bedrock. Okay, you need to get rid of the dirt and everything that has anything organic in it. You got to go all the way down to the bedrock. The forest has to be totally gone, and then the dog has to be mixed in with non-organic materials like sand, clay, stuff like that, and then he needs to be like completely embedded in it. That needs to be laid down, and he needs to be undisturbed for a long time, tens of thousands of years. Okay, that is how you make a fossil. That is not a common occurrence. Okay, it happens a lot more often with sea creatures because the bottom of the sea is generally a sort of a non-organic environment, right? Okay,
Man, so I'm seeing where you're going here. Like this idea of the fossil record being what was passed is like possibly just maybe a couple of snapshots.
There's
of like
snapshots. Exactly right.
And there's all this other stuff that we don't have records of.
Yes.
All.
I like to use this analogy. If you think of a record as in an old school, vinyl, like a big old vinyl, and you're holding it, like, let's say you're standing there and you're holding it, like, this is the record of everything that's ever lived on Earth, and you're holding it in front of you.
Waves.
And you just happen to be standing next to a freeway, and a giant semi drives past, and the record goes flying out of your hand, and then it lands on the road and shatters, and then a bunch of cars drive over it, and the few tiny little slivers that you have left is the fossil record we've got.
Yeah.
Just these tiny little chunks that are snapshots, of what was on that entire record.
Right.
So the concept of the fossil
Should
record...
have made it out of gold.
That's right. Build your books out of gold. The concept of the fossil record having something you can consult, expecting to find, like, where did this come from? It's just,
or the progression of life.
Right, it's ludicrous. It is snapshots from cataclysmic events that geologists have not even believed were real for like the past 200 years or whatever. Like they didn't even, the idea of a cataclysm on a global scale, which is what you need to make something like, look at the Permian extinction event, which was, or I'm sorry, is it the Cambrian? It's either Cambrian or Permian. Anyway, that there's an extinction event, one of the first ones. It was the most massive that we know of. There's like 5 total mass extinction events that are global.
Oh, really? So we're in the 50 buck.
That's right. That's right. The glittering world. it's the Permian extinction event and then the Cambrian explosion. That's what it is. So the Permian extinction event wiped out like 99% of everything that was alive on the planet at the time. Probably more than that. Okay,
Wow.
it was probably down to it wiped out everything down to like ocean algae. Okay, I've read some things where people are like, well, some cockroaches, some things like that, bugs or whatever survive, but I'm not sure about that. The very first thing where I've read this massive thing on the extinction events, they were like, this wiped out everything down to single-celled ocean bacteria, basically. Okay, so whatever life was extant on that planet, on this planet before that happened, gone. In terms of evolution, if you look at it from an evolutionary idea that things were evolving or whatever, all of it's gone, all the way back down to single cells. The next, and so then you have the Cambrian explosion. So the next epoch, they call it the Cambrian era or whatever. All of a sudden, and this is it looks like this to these people because of these snapshots. There's an explosion. Suddenly, there's life everywhere, and like we got ferns and bugs and shit crawling around on the ground or whatever, and they're not just in the oceans. All these different sea life, crustaceans, and that just comes out of nowhere. Well, it looks like it comes out of nowhere because you're looking at short photographs of long periods of time. Okay, so yeah, so going back to crops, not getting too far off on that tangent. Back to crops, the idea of maybe finding the ancestors of some domestic plants is, I mean, that's the odds are not good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you notice.
So how do you interpret that the ancient texts say, we were given these things by the gods? I mean, I know that there could be numerous ways to look at it, but...
Well, in my opinion, and this is just something I've been developing over time, I do think that there have been advanced ancient civilizations, like really advanced ancient civilizations, maybe not space flight, could be, but it doesn't matter. The point is that is it not easy to see how post-cataclysmic humans, who have basically been reduced all the way down to almost the animal level, like there are plenty of South American texts that talk about how their people, before the coming of Viracocha, the civilizer god, that they lost language. They didn't even know how to talk anymore. Mm-hmm. Think about that. Like, you can imagine losing everything and being like in the woods starving and but you would still know how to talk.
Right.
These people had lost the ability to talk. They had forgotten what that even meant.
Wow.
And it said that they were cannibals. They lived naked, like they didn't know about clothes or talking. Okay, so they were animals. All right, but they were. The text makes it clear that they previously had been people. That they weren't. It wasn't like they had always been animals, and this guy came and we're like, you're monkeys. Yeah. Stop being monkeys. Right? That's not what happened. They were people that had lost everything all the way down to like. They lost everything, including the ability to speak to each other.
So you're basically thinking that the idea that we were quote unquote given agriculture or domesticated plants and animals from the gods, quote unquote, would be that like remnants of that ancient civilization.
Yeah.
Was lost
So two things could happen, and this is just I'm guessing,
right.
But like you could say, all right, because we do this now. We look at these ancient structures and we're like, oh my god, like who could build that, right? Yeah. So you can easily see some more primitive versions of humans there, and they've been living in this area, and then one of them finds up in the mountains, like say in the Andes or whatever, they know it's not natural, and they're just like, what is who, and you think that that gods must have done this.
And maybe
right?
there's
statues.
remnants of their crops that are growing now. And
yeah, they're growing quote unquote wild or whatever.
So they find this temple and there's all this food around it and everything. They're like, holy smokes!
Right, and so
smokes, let's go.
Smokes, let's go. So, but then there's too many legends where the gods actually come to them. So you can't just say like, well, they found ancient stuff and they thought, wow, gods made this, and it really was ancient humans that they had forgotten about. There's too many times where they're like, not only did that happen, but there were also like somebody showed up and was like, hey,
Lil showed up and gave the Adamu the plow.
Right.
Like, hey, here's this thing.
Go use it in my garden. Go.
Push, dirt.
Right. But so there's too many stories of, and these are global, of someone showing up, usually one guy with a sort of a follower, a group of followers. So you have the main civilizer god, and then his I don't know what you would call it, retinue, the people that follow him, and they basically go around and they find all of these stragglers from the cataclysm, and they give them their language back. They give them the understanding that you can make tools. Here's how to do agriculture.
You can live peacefully together.
Right. You can make laws that apply to everyone, that make you all sort of act better, you know, and you have like the concept of civilization period all the way down to like plumbing and, you know, running water and everything. And they showed them architecture, astronomy, right?
And agriculture.
And agriculture. So given from the gods. Now, who were these people? I mean, that is the question. I mean, I would say that if there's a question that we will explore on this podcast, that will be one that we will be exploring more than almost any other one. Is who were the gods? Because I think that they weren't creator beings. These guys didn't build the universe.
Yeah, that's another thing that we use to do when we're having a discussion about the gods or gods,
Lowercase
or God. We use the uppercase and lowercase g.
Yeah.
Depending on what we're talking about. So if there's an idea of like a greater consciousness or some creative conscience,
Right, or like
whatever,
this vast like geometric concept of the universe, you might talk about uppercase G, this distant but intelligent thing, or whatever. Or you're talking about ancient people talking about that. And then you have the lowercase g guys who are running around in butt flaps, also killing people and using giant swords.
Yeah.
But they had more advanced butt flaps, basically.
Yeah. So we look at the the gods of the pantheon, and honestly the gods of most modern religions, all modern religions, really.
Yeah.
The ones that were like humans in our likeness.
Right, but seemingly immortal.
Yeah, that actually came here physically or whatever, interacted with mankind in that way. We call them lowercase g gods.
Right. And that gets into like, the immortal thing is another big question. We like the search for life, for everlasting life, has been one that you can find stories about this going back. I mean, the story of Gilgamesh, right? Like the oldest known story. The human race written down story, Gilgamesh was, he's like, I'm 3 parts God. How come I'm not immortal? Basically, he goes on this giant quest, and he's actually given the plant by Noah.
Right.
And we know it's Noah now. He was like, his name was Sisyphus or something like that.
And then a snake stole it.
That's right, a snake. God damn it.
Serpents. Maybe it was a good snake.
It was probably a good snake. Well, yeah. I mean, there's some indications that some of the gods were like, humans shouldn't be immortal. And then think about this. Like, we've talked about this before. Like, let's just like accept for now.
Didn't he do something stupid? Just like, hey, look at this pool. Well, I'm gonna set this plant down and dive in the pool.
No. Noah told him that it was a water plant and that he needed to dive for it.
Oh, yeah,
and he dives and he finds it. And then he's like, sweet, everlasting life. And he passes out and goes to sleep. And when he wakes up, it's gone. The snake's over. I'm like, how'd you know it was a snake? You're sleeping, bro. But
Good question.
yeah, you can tell that it's an esoteric, it's a metaphor.
Yeah, but even that story, I was just thinking, I had this idea that the gods giving everlasting life, or whatever this idea of everlasting life, when you consider that humanity has been through multiple cataclysms,
right,
or the possibility that we've survived through multiple cataclysms that have almost destroyed us all and utterly destroyed our advancement
and completely rewritten the face of the earth.
Right. That everlasting, or man searching for everlasting life, could be that sort of like memory of mankind seeking how to make it through the next cataclysm. Right.
That is a really good point. So that is a metaphor for like, how do we survive these cataclysms without going all the way back to nothing?
Yes, so the whole story of Gilgamesh and all of his trials and the fact that he actually finds it but then fails and it's stolen from him is similar to some of the things we talk about today.
That was a bad snake then.
Well, yeah, it's similar to things we talk about today, like there is no space flight.
Mm-hmm. Can't go to space.
Yeah, because really, when we're talking about how does the human race achieve everlasting life? We gotta get off this rock.
That's right. That's a really good point. Damn it! There's not individual everlasting life? Shit!
How did we get here from domesticated plants?
Okay.
Maybe that's what we are. We're all domesticated animals.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, they're like, yeah, God showed up and they told us how to talk and everything, and we were wild animals, and now we're what? Domesticated.
Yep.
I mean, what do you do to a dog? You teach it tricks, you know, it fucking goes and touches your paper. Anyway.
Here, come inside my garden.
Yeah.
Kill the rats.
That's right.
Chase off the possums.
Get it, goddammit! So, going back to domestication, like, again, I'll repeat again, probably for the 5th or 6th time in the podcast, we don't know how to do it. But you will not find that anywhere. If you go look it up, everyone knows how to do it. So what I should probably say is we haven't ever done it. And that is why I say we don't know how to do it. It's one of those things where they look at the pyramid and they're like, yeah, so it's there, so it can be done, so we know how to do it. And if we tried, we could do it, and nobody tries. It's just assumed and accepted that we could do it because ancient people did it and they were dumb as butt flaps, and we're not, right? I'm standing there in jeans, I can build this pyramid.
I got pants.
I got pants.
Boots.
That's right. I got tools, sheets. So no one has domesticated something to the point to where it's like that matches in any way the domestic stuff that we use and we have been using for thousands, 10,000 years or whatever. So, and that makes it interesting. Like, you look at some of these ancient carvings and you see weird chimeras. You know, like the chimera is a specific being, but you could also use that term generically to mean it's a mix of stuff. You know, because the chimera's got the head of an eagle, and it's got wings, and it's got a body of a lion. That's the chimera, whatever. I mean, it's the head of a lion, maybe. I don't know. But so there are chimeric creatures in all these ancient carvings that appear to be interacting. Now, you know, you see esoteric meanings to those creatures, and we know that the Egyptians made their gods into therianthropes. They were human-shaped bodies with some animal head, right? Like Hermes Tahoti Thoth was given the ibis bird head with the long curved beak. You know, now did he really have an ibis head? Probably not. Why did they give him an ibis head? I've never been able to figure that out.
Yeah, I don't know. Why was Horus a falcon?
That's right. Yeah, the Horus King, the falcon. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but
I shall marry this princess as a falcon.
I shall marry her as a falcon. We shall have children. They shall be foulmen.
They will become the foul kings.
That's right. They shall be kings. Foul king. We spent 2 or 3 days. My uncle went to Egypt just before the Egyptian Spring, which destroyed a lot of ancient temples there. And so just before that, he was in Egypt, spent 2 weeks there, and he had a 16 megapixel camera, and took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos. And when I found this out, I was like, dude, you gotta give them to me right now. So he sent me a jump drive full of them, and we spent days looking through very carefully these high resolution pictures, and like, it's just all of
the statue of that falcon, like, he looks so smug. Just like, it's like he's saying no.
Yeah.
All the time.
Every time the falcon came up, you see him.
No! And you have to, like, if we were just making up this stupid stuff, like, if you were one of his subjects, you had to ask a question
that he could say no
to in order to get it, because if he really wanted to do it, he couldn't say yes, because just his face like,
is a no face.
Yeah. Like, you say, "Oh, king, would you like to marry this woman as a falcon?" Ask me if I would not like to marry her as a falcon.
Would you not like to marry her as a falcon, O king?
No. It's retarded.
Yeah, but so the idea of chimeric creations has always kind of been a concept. Like, was there somebody way back in history? Like, okay, so we have this domestication. Who is doing this? Like, there's this idea that, okay, so I was saying that, you know, if you go ask on the internet, can we domesticate stuff, or do we know how this was done? They'll say yes, and they'll tell you that the way it was done was over hundreds of years of culling, basically, where you know,
right,
you're sort of breeding them for the traits you want, and you end up with this domestic thing. Well, that makes zero sense in terms of agriculture. If you just want to look at it from the crop, from terms of crops, like, in order to do that, you need to not move around. Okay, we're learning this right now. To be a farmer, you cannot be moving around. You've got to stay where your fields are, because they need constant maintenance. Okay, and let's say that you are a hunter-gatherer, and you decide, for whatever reason, you're like, man, tired of walking, I'm gonna stay here. Okay, and you know that like during the winter periods, some animals leave, and some, normally you'd be following herds around or whatever. So you're gonna need, if you're gonna stay in this spot and not be roaming off miles and miles, foraging, you're gonna need to have a source of food there that is constant, that you can sort of hopefully rely on. Well, you don't have anything. You have no domestic crops. And there isn't anything wild, like I was talking about with the grasses. Like if you were going to try to grow grain, well, guess what? There isn't any grain. And in order to do what they're talking about, so you get a plot of land, and you're like, all right, I'm going to plant these grass seeds here, and my great grandsons will have food. No, that doesn't work.
That doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't make any sense.
And in order to plant these grass seeds very easily, I will get this oryx.
Right.
And my great grandsons will be able to use them as oxen.
Right. After they learn how to mine iron. Which I don't know about yet because it's down on the ground.
So that's a big mystery.
That brings up a question. I was not planning on this, but like, how did we find out about metals in the ground? Whose idea was it to like dig? And then they come up. You look at most of the ores that metal are in. You don't know. It looks like a rock. You have to do all this really specific chemical and burning, smelting shit to get.
That has to be just to me.
How do you do? I can. The only answer I can ever come up with this is resonance. Somebody had resonance technology a long time ago where you could do something and you could see down in the earth. Oh, look at that. That's weird looking. And then maybe you dig to it to find out what it is. And then you just, I don't know, but I'm just saying, like, who first found out about aluminum? It's a powder that you have to do really specific shit to get, I mean, like...
Even silver.
Yeah.
Silver is...
The only ones I know of are gold and copper that will sit on the ground as a piece of metal. Everything else is an ore, and it doesn't look...
Well, hold up. Stainless steel.
What about it?
From impacts. From meteorites.
That's true, yes.
I mean, because it's like nickel and iron.
And carbon, which is what you need to make steel, yeah.
Right. So, I saw when I went to, what's that?
And it gets smelted by the entry. Yeah.
Right. That impact site in
Arizona? You were at what is it called?
I don't remember.
Behringer's crater.
Yeah, they had a piece, this massive chunk.
They call it meteor crater, but it's named the scientific name for it's they named it after the guy who was insistent that it was a meteor crater when no one believed him. Behringer.
Yeah, well, that thing is on display, like what they pulled out of the mine that's down in the middle of it.
Yeah,
it's huge. It's like,
and it was a nickel iron meteorite.
Yeah, and it was just it looked like stainless steel to me. I was like, man, this is freaking. So okay, my point is that could have been found.
Certainly,
right? And of course, I would think this. If you were even butt flap peoples, right? You're just roaming around in butt flaps doing your thing, and you see that, the serpent in the sky, right? You see that thing come down, and you witness from, far enough away the explosion or whatever. Like, man, I can imagine them saying, "Well, what was that? Let's go check it out." And it's possible they might find that and it be a relic that was passed down. For many generations. I'm trying to come up with the mundane that's explanation here for of course, Russ, that's how they did it.
The dragon came down and like when it landed it blew up the ground and left these things.
Okay,
thunder eggs.
Tell your King Arthur.
To me the sword and the stone. Like, I had this epiphany one day when because you're reading about, and you watch the cartoons, and there's this kid trying to there's a sword stuck in a rock, and he's like, and everybody goes to pull on it, and they can't pull it out. Well, if you look at ancient sword making, the best weapons, in ancient times, were magical. Excalibur, they were magic. Like, people didn't understand them. They were like, this is magic. The Sword of the Stone is a story about a wizard, right? Somebody who had ancient knowledge, Merlin, and his protege making a sword from a meteor. Because the meteor drawing the sword from the stone. So you like the sword of this, it's
unbreakable. It doesn't rust.
This is why it didn't matter how strong you were.
You know, and the thing is, like, the strongest men couldn't pull a sword from the stone. It doesn't matter how strong you are. It's just a rock that you know. But Merlin, the magician, the sorcerer, knew the ancient techniques. They smelted it and made Excalibur, right? And they probably pulled it from a crater lake.
Right. They pulled the original meteorite from the crater lake.
So the Lady of the Lake, right. So you get the meteorite, because Merlin would look at the lake and be like, that is a crater.
I wonder if you could use that analogy of the story to determine where it was found.
Possible. It's possible. So the weapon they made, Excalibur, was made of steel. Right. And steel.
Why it sliced other swords.
And I
in
mean,
half.
it's just steel. There's no comparison to copper or iron. I mean, just it would be shiny, like an iron sword is black.
And he would pull out his sword and it shone.
Yes, it would. I mean, it would reflect in the sun, and it would just be and it was, you could bend it, and it would go and go back to. I mean, steel is amazing. Yeah, steel is amazing.
That's a great. I love that analogy. That's
the sword and the stone, and the Lady of the Lake.
Right.
If I went round saying I was emperor, just with some watery thought threw a scimitar at me, it put me away. It was a fucking meteorite, you dumbass.
Yeah. How did they get to the bottom of the lake to get that thing out?
Submersible. Duh. Magic bubble? I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's
Gillyweed.
right. In the beginning of the cartoon, Merlin shows up wearing like, you know,
they were
a Hawaiian shirt.
That's right. He's a fish. Turned into a fish. So there's analogies like that in all kinds of ancient stories. This pulling the sword from the stone.
But still,
and I would never have figured that out had I not started to look into ancient weaponry, I started to do that because I started to find out stuff about hardened copper. Anyway, that's a tangent we can go on some other time.
But still, going back to the main point here is that no matter in modern times, if you look at these three main things: architecture, agriculture, and astronomy, we have not yet found the origin of that knowledge.
That's right.
The knowledge of any of those.
Some of the oldest known structures that we've ever found are some of the best. That can't be the beginning.
Right. And from all these tales about the agriculture and the domesticated animals and plants just suddenly appearing as though it was a legacy.
That's right. So the people of Jericho, going back to that whole thing, they showed up knowing how to do this. They weren't dudes in butt flaps that decided they were tired of walking. They had probably lost their homeland in the Cataclysm, and they were wandering, looking for a new place to settle. And
they had one wizard with them,
right?
One wise man who knew of the ancient. Yeah. He knew, and led the people to the place where the knowledge and all of this.
The hard thing to believe about that is that it continued. Well, unless the sage was very long lived, which is possible because of the pre-cataclysm legends of people's lifespans or whatever. But the hard thing to believe about that is you see this progression happening over generations, that they get that somebody is still feeding knowledge into the structure of the civilization they were building. In other words, they would reach a certain level and they're like, now we can do this, and somebody had to know that next thing was there. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. So that looks, I would say with that either they were much longer lived than we are now, which is totally possible, and so the sage would live a long time, or that all of them knew enough to where they could pass this knowledge down to their children in such a way to where it wasn't.
And this goes back to the parable idea. Like, if long before one of the technologies that they had was to turn this knowledge into an esoteric knowledge, something that would be passed down by using the parable or by using archetypes. This is the way to everlasting life.
Yeah.
Of humanity.
So let's talk about that briefly. Why? Are we getting up here on time?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we'll do that in the next section.
Yeah.
Of course, you guys, just click on the next file.
That's right. Just keep that question in mind. Why?
Yeah. Snake Bros.
All right, welcome to the second half of the second hour of Brothers of the Serpent. Let's just get right back into it. I was asking a question: why esoterica at all? Why are we hiding knowledge at all? What are we concealing it from?
there's always this concept of like that the knowledge will come to those who are worthy of it. But really, when you look at that, and so there's this idea of the path of the initiate, like you become initiated into the ancient mysteries, right? And there's all these mystery schools that spring up all over the place, and a lot of them, at least the more modern ones, seem to have missed the mark pretty wide. I can't say so for sure because I don't, as an initiate without a master, right? Somebody to guide, you're just making your own way, so there's no way to know for sure. But yeah, so why esoteric? Why are we concealing knowledge at all? What do you think the purpose of that is?
Well, one of the things I thought of about it is that when I look at good and evil, okay, the idea of, well, let's just take governments, for example, throughout history. A monarchy, a king. He could destroy knowledge on purpose so that his subjects remain stupid, remain uneducated, and thereby they are easier to control. Or fill their heads full of lies, superstitions and certain things. We had talked about this a little bit in the pilot program about how, for example, the Catholic Church requires a person to come and confess their sins, right? And then the Catholic Church also defines what sins are. And then they also define what happens to sinners who do not confess. Yeah. And it kind of, you can see where this is going. Like when the Catholic Church was a government, they wanted their subjects to come and tell them the things they did wrong, and they wanted their subjects to believe that if they didn't, that they were going to die a horrible death and live forever in just eternal hell. Right. And all of that stuff. So it's easy to see, just doing a little bit of research in world history, how mankind, people seeking power, also seek simultaneously to destroy knowledge. Like China is blocking Google search, queries and stuff. Like they do not want their people to know certain things because it makes it easier for them to rule. Yeah. So to me, esoterica is a brilliant thing. I used to think of hiding the truth as that's evil, like that's bad. Secret societies I looked at like suspiciously, like why are they hiding stuff? I'm not saying I embrace secret societies. I don't really know at this point because it seems like a great idea to hide the truth in plain sight. And we talked about how the Masons, the Masonic tradition back in the day, when they were building cathedrals and temples and all this stuff, they put the symbolism that is, that the Masonic tradition preserves, they put it all in the ruler's buildings. Yeah. So that there was no way for the ruler to erase it or to get rid of it. And in many cases, I'm sure the rulers didn't even know what it all meant. They were just like, yes, angels over there, and crops and everything's over here. And but people start counting things and they're like, hey, there's processional numbers and all of this. So it's obvious that they were hiding the truth in plain sight and just masking it, occulting it in something else. Like you can occult the truth in beauty, and people will be like, wow, this is so beautiful, and they'll go and show it to everybody. Which is, the kings wanted to have these big processions marching up to their buildings and their castles, and they would show off all of their glamorous stuff, which, there were masters of masonry, which is also a technology and a knowledge that, quote unquote, was kept hidden by the Masons, and you could only learn it if you joined them, because they, it seems obvious to me, they wanted to preserve that knowledge, and the way to do it, also preserving other knowledge while preserving the knowledge of Masonry. So
I've always figured that somebody at some point figured out that building things out of stone is always going to be something that rulers want.
Right.
And if you wipe out all your Masons, you just like kill them all down to a man because they're stuck up or whatever, you don't like them, they don't like their faces, and you kill them all, and then you're like, then you want a castle.
Well, you're screwed.
You're screwed, yeah, because they have to start from scratch. There's a lot of knowledge in Masonry that is passed down from master to apprentice that is not intuitive. And so it's one of those technologies or bodies of knowledge that has grown generationally, and like over time somebody finds out one thing that, man, this works great, another dude finds a secret, and they sort of collude with this, and then you build up this store of knowledge, but it has to be passed down. So the apprentice learns all these things, but if you kill everybody, they have to start from nothing, and you basically you can't get a castle. So the kings, the rulers, would tend to not kill off their masons because they needed those guys.
Right. So they made a deal,
Yeah, well, and the thing is that a bunch of people, seems to me like a bunch of people, including other people that had bodies of knowledge, but that could be wiped out by kings, started to realize this and started to feed all of the stuff that they had into masonry to save it.
That's possible, yeah.
That's why you have what's called.
And then again, well, sorry.
It's called speculative Freemasonry. In other words, that like you no longer have to actually work with stone to be a Freemason because of this problem. Like it's speculative in the sense that like we want people that are artists, that are that are architects, that are wizards. You want people that can do all this different stuff, and you put them in masonry because the masons will never be wiped out by the kings because the kings need castles.
So on the one hand, it kind of sucks that the truth has to be hidden. But to think, what I think is that if the truth was not hidden, then it would be destroyed by greed, by the hunger for power and control over other people. So it's necessary to prolong it. It's necessary to hide it, and esoterica is like, or the esoteric is hidden in plain sight.
Right. So it's a way to conceal your knowledge from destruction.
Right.
Not to hide it from people
from being discovered, right? But again, we're talking about humanity here, and there are evil people that will also discover it, and they will also discover where it is hidden and why and how, and they will infiltrate those institutions. Okay, so this goes back to
Brotherhood of the Serpent.
Right, the Brotherhood of the Serpent, or
initially started by Enki to send knowledge out into the human race, and then it was discovered and infiltrated and taken over by agents of Enlil, who did not want humans to have this knowledge, and they began to propagate negative things using that knowledge. But there are still members of it.
So it's a battle still with the esoteric knowledge. You have. Let's just use Christianity as an example. You have these ancient texts that when they were, at the time that they were written, the writers were encoding some ancient knowledge, or perhaps the writers were just writing some history, and then later on people translating it encoded through numbers in there and did whatever. Yep. The point is that at near around the time that the texts were written, they were encoding all of this ancient knowledge. Mm-hmm. Well, obviously some evil people and people that want that knowledge to be covered up even further discovered this about these ancient texts and started changing the meaning of them, or the original meaning was forgotten, and so then they start messing with it and manipulating it, and
you get to a point where the original meaning is forgotten, but there's still people that revere it, but they don't know why.
Right.
And then you can use that.
And that's what we call quant stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's this old science fiction story that I read, and I won't get into all the details, but basically in one part of it, you encounter the reader encounters a scientific expedition that had been lost hundreds of years before in space. So they ended up on an asteroid. Okay, so the original ship full of like highly qualified scientists or whatever with all their gear, something goes wrong with their ship and they end up in the asteroid belt of the solar system, and they end up on an asteroid, and they are able to like live there barely. So hundreds of years later, you encounter them in the book, and their descendants have grown up in this place full of scientific stuff, books, texts, instruments, and all this stuff, but they no longer know what it means, what any of it is, but they can read, right? But they have sort of ritualized all of these things. Okay, so we use the term quant stuff because at the end of like in older chemistry textbooks, they'll give you a formula, and they'll give you the directions for how you're going to do a specific chemical procedure.
And there's a lot of abbreviations throughout the whole thing, and one of them is quantity sufficient, right? Quant suff is how it's spelled, Quantsuff. And in the story, the people had various things that you associate with science that they would use to mean like amen, or
the end of a prayer.
yeah, at the end of a prayer. And quant suff, they said it all the time. They're like quant suff, and they would repeat it as a
Science is
chant, right? That this is good is what the quant suff meant to them. We use it as a way to say, like, we'll say that's quant suff is where you, and this happened to us the first time really in depth when we were looking at the concept of making horns, like instruments, musical instrument out of a ram's horn, which is curved. It's got this spiral. And you look, and Kyle was trying to do this. He had horns and he was trying to like drill them out because the
curved holes.
Right. So you got the first 1/3 of the length of the horn, which is also the tightest spiral coming off, is solid, and the wide end is hollow. So you have to drill a hole through that solid part to get through the solid part to get to the hollow part to make the horn. But how do you drill a hole in a spiral? And he directed me to this website where all these rabbis and stuff like were discussing this problem, and the way they do it now is they use a lot of heat and steam and they straighten it out and they drill a hole, right? And they were discussing it in
different ways, or you can cut this part of the horn off and drill this section
Right.
and glue it back together.
And the way they were discussing on it with the correct procedure was what other people had said, right? And they're going into all this
in more ancient texts, like
yes. So they're like, well, Rabbi blah blah in 1436 said this, and like you can tell reading the way they were talking about it, they had lost the original what was happening in the first place. They had lost the idea of what they were doing, and they were just doing it by ritual. So
we call that
quant suff.
They quant suffed it.
So the people in the science fiction story did not know what chemistry was, and they had lost so much information. They didn't even have the information to again arrive at what chemistry was. That is quant suff, where you like they have lost so much knowledge, but they have this ancient stuff left
And they're
over.
still doing these rituals that get it right in some way.
Yeah, but they have no idea. But like you could think of it as like you could think of any number of things that we do to, like, let's say that you got a car and like way in the future after a big cataclysm there's still an old car sitting out there rusting, and people like once a week go all sit in the car and they've got very specific ways of who's got to sit where and what you're doing and whatever, and like they make the motions of turning the key, but they have no idea what they're doing or that the car was even a car. They don't know anything.
Right.
There's just this ritual that they're doing, and that is quant suff.
Yeah, and they believe that it takes you somewhere else.
That's right. And they're like, they all close their eyes and they're like, oh yes, I can feel it. They don't know what is going. Yeah, and they've lost they've lost the knowledge to even arrive at the original purpose of the car. So yeah, that's quant suff, and that is one of the more difficult to explain terms that we use, but we use it a lot.
We'll run into it again, and it'll become more and more clear.
Yeah, we're like
how you can use it.
Yeah, like that's quant suff.
Yeah.
Completely forgot everything that they needed to know to forget about this thing.
But they're still doing it.
That's right. They're still doing it,
And they're almost doing it right.
And it's in a way kind of sad, because it's like there's this desperate attempt to cling on to something that they know is great.
Right, and this goes back to the esoteric knowledge. There are obviously forces or people or ideas in the past that were trying to preserve the truth while hiding it. Why were they hiding it? Possibly because other people wanted to come along and screw it up and get rid of it or stamp it out. So a lot of things, there are quite a few, I can't think of any offhand, but things that are quant suff, and it looks like, when you start looking back on how this happened, that there was some purposeful misdirection in what was going on, and that is why it is quant suff now, because someone meant to make it that way.
I think magic contains a lot of quant suff.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see hints of things in there, but like every time I start talking about magic, I start to think that this is something that I recognize that this is an ancient, awesome thing, but I don't even have the tools to build the tools that I need to understand what it might be. Like, it's a lot harder to recognize quant stuff in yourself. But when you're looking at something else, somebody's like that, those people have completely forgotten what they. Yeah, it's easier to see that way, but it's definitely in all of our cultures.
At the end of a prayer, you're saying part of the name of the sun god.
That's right. Amen. Ra. Yeah.
That's weird.
And like Christians will tell you that amen means so be it. Nope.
So
Nope.
so
It means hidden.
I explained one of that's my theory about.
Think of that. Hidden is what that means. Amen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Amen Ra means the hidden God, the concealed God. So when they're like,
that was another aspect.
blah, 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 Amen, they're just basically saying, here's my prayer, hide.
That reminds me of another aspect of the hidden knowledge, the esoteric. Just to throw this in there, I did talk about this in the pilot program too, but the parables, the stories, the esoteric knowledge that is hidden in these stories, they also chose to create those stories and parables using the stars and the constellations because they knew that those would not go anywhere. So there's like a story and then there's a picture book. And if you can't quite remember the story exactly, if you had the picture book and you could flip through the images, you could be like, oh yeah, and then there was this guy and he did this, and then you flip the next page and you see the next image. So they did that in the sky using the signs of the zodiac, the constellations of the zodiac.
Yeah, and modern archaeology does not believe that there was a concept of the zodiacal symbols previous to Hellenistic Egypt, which would be when Greece was kind of running Egypt. Like, so long after, it was like way after the 25th new kingdom and all that stuff. So you got Greece basically has taken over Hellenistic Egypt. So Alexander the Great has taken over Egypt basically, and he's running the place. That's where they think the first zodiac was. But I mean, that's it's crap.
That's like all these great civilizations that we know of in our past all did it in their own way. So it's like what you were saying in the beginning of the show, that this is a technology and these other civilizations recognized that and they made their own that was sort of current, right? And we might be doing that as a civilization today. I don't know. I don't know what our big story is that they're going to find.
Yeah.
In the future. How are we doing it? But
Twinkies,
yeah. Twinkies and Sale Town.
Anyway, that's the only thing that's gonna be left. Twinkies.
Everybody in Cleveland got one. But what was your? That's my answer, or not answer, but that's my hypothesis. Looking at the question of
I
why
remember
esoteric.
Laird Scranton had a great thing on this whole thing, and he said, because he was looking at the Dogon people of Africa that have an esoteric tradition, and it's the same thing as all this other stuff, and they have a whole bunch of knowledge hidden, and it's esoteric. But he said, when I looked at this, I'm like, why are they hiding this information? But what I found out is that anyone can be given this information. In other words, there is no barrier to acquiring the information.
Right.
You just have to want to have it. You have to start seeking for it, and then they'll start teaching you, right? So, no human is the key here. No human in the world, and the Dogon don't care if you're a white guy, or one of them, or whoever. If you come and you are a seeker, and they recognize you as a seeker, you will be given the knowledge. Like the people that the scientists that Laird Scranton studies, that these guys that spent all these years with them learning their esoteric stuff. They were from Europe. They weren't Dogon.
That sounds like the requirement to become a Mason. You have to want to do it.
That's right. And you have to ask one. Yeah. So he was like, who are they concealing this from? If any human can acquire it if they so choose. And that was his whole deal, was that he just said what it looks to me like is there is an attempt to suppress this knowledge that is non-human. That's the conclusion you come to, because you're hiding it from what? No humans. You're hiding it from people that don't ask for it.
Oh my God! So that makes okay. So in the story of like the 200 that came down onto the mountain.
Yes.
That betrayed the rules.
The fallen, yeah.
That took the daughters of men to be their wives, and the guy's like, hey, I'm not going to do this by myself, so we'll make a pact. Yeah. Like, those are the guys hiding the knowledge because they weren't supposed to give it to us. Because after that, it talks about how they taught mankind all kinds of things like magic and potions and how to make
everything, metallurgy, agriculture,
color of the eye, and
how to
beautify the face, and all of this.
How to make chicks hot.
So yeah, I can see how that they were hiding it, couching it in in these other stories to hide it from those who
Yeah.
already
And
had it, that didn't want it to be given to man.
That's right. And that's an interesting story too, because most of the places you'll read that, whatever the text, the origin of the text is, there's just kind of an idea that these guys were doing something wrong.
Right.
And that it created
Wrong.
that it created problems, right? That the knowledge that they gave man generated,
Yeah.
I don't know how to say that, blasphemy. It created
Yeah.
all this corruption.
Right.
Okay, so you say man that knows nothing is not corrupt?
Pure.
Great.
You know, that sounds like a movement. A current one. I'm sorry.
He's
Right.
pure. Yeah, so you get this idea that they were doing something bad, right? And there's all this complaining about how that mankind just went nuts. They had all this. All of a sudden, they're building things and blowing shit up and fucking.
And
doing
that he
experiments.
thought he could be as good as the gods and build a tower into
That's
heaven.
right.
Blah,
And then,
blah,
so
blah.
then you get all these stories of gods having to smash man back down to size,
Yep.
right? And
Lowercase
just
cheek.
just going back to the Christian Bible, over and over and over, you see the same trend that in the Old Testament anyway, not in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament, over and over, you see the trend of like God looks down and sees man doing a bunch of shit, and he's like, "What are they doing? We've got to stop that."
Right.
And the reason they need to stop it is not because it's evil. It's not. It doesn't say it's evil.
because
It doesn't say it's not because man is cannibal and you're eating it. No, it's because that they will become like gods if they're not stopped.
That's right.
That really bothers me. I've mentioned this to you, but I've been having recurring dreams about the Pillars of Enoch. You know, I have no idea why. I can't even remember in my life having serious recurring dreams before, but this almost every night now I dream. At some point in the dream, I'm down in a cave and I see them, and it just like it breaks my heart. Like it is so intense, the sadness that I feel every time I put my hands on them, and I just like fall to my knees and weep, like because I see them and I understand somehow in the dream. I see them and all this stuff is written on them, and like it's glyphs and everything, but for some reason like I know what they mean.
Yeah.
Like it's magic or whatever, and I see all this stuff, and just the knowledge of like what humankind has done that has been just destroyed over and over by something that doesn't want us to be in space is, you know, it's just like, oh my god, it's really intense. Like I'll wake up and just be like, okay, whoa. So that keeps happening. I don't know why. I've been wanting to bring that up, but like there's this is why I was talking about esoterica. My dreams about the Pillars of Enoch are just dreams. But esoterica is real, and it is global in scope, and it is attempting to hide knowledge from something that isn't us. Because if you're one of us and you look for it, it will be given to you. That's what Larry Scranton was saying, and I was like, that's intense. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great place to end the show.
Yeah.
It would be wrong to do that here.
Well, I don't even know what to say. I want to have a dream about the Pillars of Enoch.
Oh man, they're so intense.
Yeah, but still,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
I'm hoping now that like these recurring dreams mean that I'm gonna find them.
that would be great.
Oh man, but I'll probably be this. I'll be like,
Yeah, you'll find them and then you'll glad.
yeah, that's right. Never return.
Get lost and die.
Get lost and die.
Well, thank you guys all for listening to Brothers of the Serpent, and we are going to do this again.
Yep, it's gonna be a weekly thing for now.
Yeah, we're still working out the kinks, and hopefully you recognize that we have a much better sound quality in this show than the pilot program, and we will try to keep the advancement to this level.
Continuous, yeah. And we're gonna be adding stuff. We got all kinds of ideas, so you guys just
Yeah.
wait. It's gonna be amazing.
Oh yeah, what is there was one you were wanting to bring up. We have all these terms
Yep.
that we use that are just our thing that we use. We talked about it in both this one and the last episode. That we're thinking about coming up with very short,
Succinct, yeah.
concise definitions to, and then we'll record those, and then we'll play them, say like with the bumper music or
In the
before and
breaks.
after, in the breaks.
Yeah, so you get the break. Like we'll say we're gonna go to a break. You'll hear some music, and then you'll hear a short one of us giving a short definition of one of our terms.
Quant stuff.
Yeah.
Like in the
Well,
shortest possible definition we can give.
That one's hard to do a short.
Yeah,
one.
there are some that are very difficult, but
Yeah, like these eyes is a good one you give a short definition to.
Yeah. But we're gonna work on all that other stuff too, and so we hope you all keep listening, and we want your questions and comments because
Yes.
we don't have show notes. We're just like coming home from work, and we're like, hey, we're gonna podcast, and like we just get in here and have a brief discussion beforehand, and then we usually are like, whatever, let's just start.
Yeah, we'll have a couple of questions maybe sometimes, but so anyone who wants to post questions, we will definitely address them on the show. You know, not that we have any answers. This is not a podcast about answers. We've already said that. This is about questions.
Right.
So if you guys ask questions, we will give you even more questions.
Yeah. All right. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Bye.
No, we won't. But we'll. Snake Bros. Snake Bros.
The most powerful arm survives. Don't pick the names on you. Welcome.
All my time. So